Hi, I'm Hannah.
Hi, I'm Abby.
And this is Spilling Ink.
The Inksel podcast.
We are back for season 3, episode 3.
Yeah, the midpoint.
Wow. How fast has that gone?
I know. Well, when you've such a great guest like Brogan last week, it just whizzes by.
It really does. Yeah, this year has just absolutely blown my mind with how quickly we've kind of powered through these podcast episodes, and the feedback that they've been getting as well has been so positive.
Very positive, which is reassuring that we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing.
Definitely. So obviously this season is all about getting out there, isn't it?
Yes, sharing in publishing or performing, whatever suits.
Yeah, whatever you're kind of fitting into. I'm coming at this from more of a publishing background, print poetry and novel writing side of things. And Abby?
I do a lot of performing.
You do performance,
which is quite
poetry.
nice.
Yeah.
So we've sort of got both sides of it, both sides of the coin, which is good.
Yeah, definitely, because I think we're going to help each other out a lot, because I want to get better at performing my work, and you have said likewise that you'd like to get something in print, and I think you've said it would mean a lot to your family, haven't you? So
yes, it would be lovely.
Nice.
It'd be lovely to show my mum and my nan really what I've done. But I just need to get my act together and stop missing deadlines, because there's a load of submission windows at the minute. It's like relentless.
This time of year is busy for it.
Yes, which is great, but I just need to get my act together and actually submit, rather than just keep doing writing lists and putting my calendar and then getting tired and stressed and missing them. Yeah. Which I feel is like a universal experience at one point or another for writers.
I find as well that I enter tons of things, and the time that you hear back from them is so far in the future, I forget I've even done it. So it's almost like you get a little bitch slap 6 months down the line, like, oh, you know that poem that you thought was really good 6 months ago? No, it's not. It's not for us. We've rejected it. And it's like, oh, great, thanks.
Yeah.
I've had a few of those recently. I don't even remember entering them, and I'm like, oh, cool, great. Forgot about that, but glad you hated it.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that. I've definitely had it in the past with performing stuff where you're like, this poem's great and like I'm really proud of it, and you perform it and it just goes down like a lead balloon, and you're like, what was wrong with it? Why didn't it go well?
It's just not found its place, has it? So
no,
you haven't found its crowd, I guess.
Yeah, it's all what's the word? Like opinions, like
perspective.
Yeah, different people's perspective. Like it's all a matter of perspective and like how people interact with and interpret what you write. So
yeah, exactly.
Definitely try not to like take it to heart.
No, I never do. I think that's like the biggest piece of advice we can give to anyone listening. You've got to just, water off the duck's back kind of energy. It just is what it is. And one day somebody will accept your work, and that'll be a really great feeling.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I'm speaking from experience.
Yes.
But yeah, so last week we spoke to Brogan.
Yes. Brogan Ties Like Carlin, the most accessible of all named performers that we've ever met.
Yeah. Just such a great conversation as well, bless him. I mean, it was really nice to speak to him because obviously he was talking a lot about this kind of on-stage persona. So just like I said last week, really nice to speak to him. He's just a person.
Yes.
Off the stage.
Yes. Nice to speak to Brogan rather than Brogan Ties Like Carlin.
Yeah.
If that's a differentiation we can make.
Man, the legend, but that felt really weird to say. I'd really rather not say that.
I can just imagine Brogan being like, no.
So Hannah's gotten too weird too soon.
It's been a long day. Yeah. Our brains are a bit melted. It's very warm.
It is very warm. Yep, summer has truly hit us at the moment. So we're just going to take it nice and easy this podcast episode, aren't we?
We are, because we're going to have a lovely guest. But before we get there, creative tasks.
Yes, from last week.
Do you want to start?
Go on then. Because mine was a little bit more brief than yours.
It was. Someone said it's more accessible than mine.
Yeah, I feel as though with my with what Brogan was kind of delivering, it's all about performance, and again that is something that I'm still trying to get better at. So one of the things I kind of took from him, from like a print point of view, a page poet point of view, is trying to make sure that your performance has that element of realism to it. So is there something that people can cling to in the audience, or is it too much about the self? So I kind of had a look at my novel that I'm writing, which, as I'm sure if you've been listening to us from the beginning you will know, is about the town I grew up in and some of the experiences I had. It's not a memoir, because I definitely am making characters up and making storylines up, but it's very much inspired by things that I encountered growing up. So I think it's that idea of making sure that other people can get in on it too, and it's not too much from my perspective and my experience. I don't want it to read like a memoir. I want it to read almost like a fictional space, because quite often some of the things that happen in these spaces are so surreal.
Yes.
But I don't want it to lose that realism. So yeah, I've just reflected really on some things and tried to tweak them to make sure there's something, a hook for everyone, if that makes sense. Yeah. Something that everyone can take from it.
I love that. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so it's been nice to reflect in that way, actually.
Yeah.
So thanks, Brogan.
Thanks, Brogan. For the performers, we talked about developing a persona on stage and having more fun with it. And I thought it was really interesting, and something I'm really keen to do, although I'm not adding another creative project to my slate right now, is write a poetry show. I think I haven't told this. I think I've mentioned this to you.
Yeah, you definitely have.
The entire time I've known you, basically, I'm like, I'm gonna write it.
It's good to have dreams and ambitions.
Yeah, exactly. So I was sort of like figuring out, like, I've had like a sort of folder of notes, which I think every writer has, on this project, and I was like, how would I create a persona with this topic, and how would I have fun with it? Which are like two really interesting different questions, because the topic is again, I think I mentioned previously about medical trauma, and about the sort of relationship I had throughout having lots of surgery.
Yeah.
Very fun time. I wouldn't recommend, shockingly.
No.
And so I was like, I want this. This is an incredibly personal topic, and I want it to be from me, but it's not actually from me anymore. It's from like me as I went through those operations, and like, so this is not 26-year-old Abby. This is going to be 19-year-old Abby, and how does she feel? And that was quite interesting to kind of like become the persona of that younger version of myself. So that was really interesting. And then how do I have fun with it? It's going to be it was a really interesting question to ask myself, because it's quite a harrowing topic.
Yeah.
It's not, I didn't feel starting that there was a lot of room for laughs with it. And I think there is the capacity to, because there's definitely a lot of the stories I can tell from having surgery I have to be able to laugh about now, because they're really, really sad, and there's a lot of like quite sort of grim stuff. Not anything like legally grim, just more experience that was uncomfortable. So I was sort of looking into like how do I juxtapose these intense moments with these moments of lightness and sort of humour, and also how do I kind of exploit the humour and maximise it, that actually it is funny. It's kind of, the more I reflect on it, the more sort of notes I gather for it, the more surreal it feels.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine that.
Yeah, so I sort of played with that, and just, nothing, it's probably going to get stored away for a while, because there are other things I want to prioritise. But it was interesting to kind of have that space and sort of interrogation of that project, to be like, I wonder what I can do with this.
Yeah, I think as well, we were talking about this last week, weren't we, in this idea of poetry for everyone. I mean, we all kind of see it as a form of therapy, don't we? But in actual fact, laughter can be therapy. It can be therapeutic as well. And I think, like what you were saying, sometimes when you go through a trauma, that just seems so surreal. And I imagine, especially in kind of the recovery period, some of the situations you must get yourself into must feel like, how can this be real life? How can this actually be happening?
Yeah.
And it's one of those that at the time, it's actually, I can imagine, really traumatic. But as time passes, you can I've had experiences where you just have to laugh about it. You have to like, God, do you remember when I did that, because I was in so much pain? And you have to laugh about it. So again, maybe you could kind of try to incorporate the humour in that way, but then you don't want to take away something that is actually really quite serious, and it's really quite...
Yeah. And I think also it's like an intrinsically political story, because I genuinely don't believe you can separate like health and disability in this country from politics. No, I think they are just intrinsically linked. So yeah, it's a weird one. I think also like this year's kind of just been rough. So I just have the like capacity to engage with it in the way I want. I have set myself a sneaky little deadline. I would like to have something to submit to Huddersfield Lit Fest for next year, because I'm really deadline orientated. I think that would kind of help, and even if it doesn't happen this year, it's kind of nice to have that momentum of just like driving forward for that submission date.
Well, Brogan said that worked for him as well, kind of being deadline driven. It does for me as well. I mean, I've got a university deadline within the next week that I will probably start 2 days before. I don't have the luxury of 2 weeks, but yeah, deadlines work. They do. They get our arse into gear, don't they?
Very much so.
It's funny with the kind of stepping into a persona kind of advice that Brogan gave us last week, because it's something I've always had fed back to me, because prior to being a poet, as I was mentioned when we spoke to Claire last season, I was a musician, and that was always a feedback I got when I was on stage. Everyone was like, we can just tell you're really nervous, we can just tell you don't really want to be up there. And it was like, to be honest, I don't like having eyes on me, and so I find it really hard to step into this performance persona of someone who can just release their inhibitions.
Well,
just
you're very you.
Present.
Like, you're you're you. Like, the facet of Hannah you see is just what you get, and I really respect that.
I'm not a showy person. I'm not a everyone look at me kind of person, and I hated it, and that's one of the reasons why I've stopped performing now. I don't perform as a musician at all. Even though we get lots of people saying, "Oh, when's the next Wolf Trap gig?" I'm like, it's never going to happen, because the pressure of having to put on a performance, it's too much. It gets too much.
You should be less talented, and then less people want to
It's
see
more of
you.
a curse than a blessing. Just too much talent.
No, I love
But
it.
it's
I respect it.
No, I know. It's just I wish I could do it, but I just can't. And I've been trying for over 10 years now, and it's never happened for me. And I'm fine with that. It's like you said, I'm just not that kind of person. So we deal. We move.
You are who you are, and you own it. Should we talk about this week's guest?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah,
Let's
so
move on.
smoothly moving on.
I know.
I shall get the bio up. So this week we're being joined by the wonderful Rose Condo,
Yeah.
who has been such a gem to be around. We've both known her quite a while.
You've known her longer than me. I was quite new to the Huddersfield kind of literature scene, wasn't I? When we started Inkspill, definitely Rose set the bar, didn't she?
She has been running Attic Story. Was it 10 years? Did they just celebrate 10 years?
Was it? Yeah, what was it longer? I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head. But
Just going to double check.
We were present, weren't we, when they were kind of... We guest hosted an Attic Stories for Rose. And the next one was kind of this celebration of the fact that they've been running for an insane amount of time. And we just turned to each other and were like, oh my God, imagine being able to run a literature night for that long.
Yeah.
And still have as much success as she does. But I think the thing is, Rose very much started this idea of kind of a poetry community in Huddersfield, didn't she? And like people coming together to share their work and just really valuing each other's work as well.
Yes.
So we definitely did we were very much inspired by Rose when we started Inkspill.
We were. Sorry, I can't find how long it's been going.
We'll ask her today, because I think that'd be really
interesting.
interesting. 10 years rings a bell, but actually I'm worried we might be doing her an injustice there and she's longer.
Well, let her correct us.
Yeah.
Would you like to read the wonderful bio that Rose has provided?
And I mean, of course, because she's such a fantastic woman, it's quite a long one. She's just done so much, but
she cannot be contained.
She can't be. So Rose is a Canadian poet and educator based in Prestwich. She has won slams across the UK, and she performs her work nationally and internationally. Rose has written and toured 3 solo shows: The Geography of Me, The Empathy Experiment, and How to Starve an Artist, which was published in 2017. She has published 2 poetry collections with Manchester's Flapjack Press, How to Find Where You Belong and After the Storm. She was a contributing writer to the groundbreaking anthology Spoken Word in the UK. She hosts monthly event Attic Stories at Lawrence Batley Theatre, and she runs creative writing workshops with such organisations as the Bradford Literature Festival, the British Library, Hoot Creative Arts, the Huddersfield Literature Festival, Royal Exchange Theatre, SICK Festival, and George Sculpture Park. Rose's radio and podcast features include BBC Radio Manchester, CBC Manitoba, Love the Words on Chapel FM, The Loudcast, Poets Talking Bollocks, and now Spilling Ink.
Well, babe.
Not much to say there, really.
No, just sped through it.
That is insane, isn't it? Just how much she's done. So I just think today is going to be a really, really good conversation.
Yeah, she's an absolute gem. And I it's like the same with Brogan. Like, these people I've known socially, I'm very excited to actually, I was going to say drill down. That sounds very intense.
That's what we're doing, though. That's what we do. We drill.
Yeah.
That's probably... Do you know what? One of my kids at school will probably tell me that means something very inappropriate, but I'm just far too innocently minded for that. No. But yeah, just she's going to have loads to tell us, isn't she? So that's... I can't wait.
Let's go see her then.
Let's go have a chat. Okay, so we are joined by Rose Condo. So first of all, would you be able to introduce yourself to anyone who maybe isn't from kind of the Huddersfield area? And yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, happy to. Hello, I'm Rose. I'm originally from Canada and have lived off and on in the UK for over 20 years, but still sound very Canadian or Irish. I get that quite a lot. So I am currently a poet and performer and writer. So I do lots of things involving those different skills. So I run poetry workshops. I host a poetry night in Huddersfield, Attic Stories. I tour shows that I've written. I've published some books. I sometimes find time to write. And then I also work full time for an organization called Arts Emergency, which is a networking charity to help give all young people a fair start in the arts. I did used to live in Huddersfield, which I absolutely loved, but I moved across the Pennines a few years ago for
Traitor.
love. I know.
He's very lovely though, so we respect it.
So I'm now in Manchester. Um, yeah, and I have a background in the arts. I studied dance when I was younger, and I studied theater at university. But poetry kind of found me and grabbed me and hung on.
I love that. This is we literally just before we sat this call with you, we were saying that I've known you and our previous guest last week was Brogan for quite a while now. Classic. And I was just saying I'm really excited to actually talk to you outside like performing and like being at events and like actually hear stuff. So like you saying that you studied dance, like I had no idea.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of makes sense thinking of your poetry. Your poetry is very like lyrical and musical and like, there's a real sort of like rhythm to it. So there's kind of like a nice sort of crossover there and how I've heard your work. So that's lovely.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's cool. It's funny, isn't it, when you kind of know fellow poets or creative people for some time, but you only ever encounter them at gigs and things. It feels like there's not often a lot of time to like get into it and talk about souls. So hurrah for Info for that reason.
Yeah, very much so.
It does, and it kind of makes a lot of sense in terms of the performance side of things as well, because that's one of the things whenever I've seen you perform, it just blows me away. Just the way you kind of enter that performance too. I just think, yeah, a lot to learn from you. So that kind of makes sense. That's where that came from. So cool.
Yeah, very lush. Before we ask the next question, we just have to clarify, how long has Attic Stories been running?
It just celebrated its 10th birthday. And now it's 10 years since I started hosting events there, but actually it started by Troll Theatre before that, who were a resident company at the Lawrence Valley Theatre, which is where it runs. And it has been called several different things.
Yeah.
So I was going to have to give that caveat that it's been around for like a decade, but it's been a few different iterations, but it's been wonderful all along.
Oh God, yeah, we regularly reference Attic Stories. It's like, if anybody's there to go to Huddersfield, go to Attic Stories.
I know, it's a shame that I'm not more local, because I'm I'm Hebden Bridge, so going towards Huddersfield, and it's I would love to get over more to attend the nights, because the ones that we have been to, just such a lovely community, and just such lovely people there. So
yeah, oh, thank you. And also I would say the same about your night, which I have never been to because I don't live in Huddersfield anymore, but hear epic things about it. So
that's reassuring, you know. Nice. And hopefully we'll get you across to the festival, and you can because that's on Saturday. Lovely. So the next question I want to ask is, please could you introduce your books, because this season's about sharing, and we had Brogan for performing last week, but we're particularly interested this week on picking your brains on publishing, but there are some performing questions sprinkled in.
Hooray! It's surreal to think that I have published 2 books. I have both published by Flapjack Press, which is a brilliant Manchester publisher who primarily publish performance poets. And so, just have an absolute incredible lineup of people that they've published. So it's been an absolute treat to be part of that Flapjack family. And so my first book is called After the Storm. And it is a combination of my first 3 poetry shows. So The Geography of Me, How to Starve an Artist, and The Empathy Experiment. So it's a little bit of like a mini anthology of my shows. And the second book is How to Find Where You Belong, which I published last year. And that's more of a traditional poetry collection. And I published the first one in 2020. So
nothing happened that year. It was completely fine.
Exactly. It was kind of like my my quarantine or lockdown project, because I was able to just channel a lot of the anxious, uncertain, sitting at home energy into editing the book. And I was really my work is quite participatory when I perform it, and I wanted to figure out how to translate that into the book somehow. So I wanted to have kind of participatory elements to it and it not be a kind of traditional collection. So each of the shows have illustrations that my wonderful friend Jen McDonald did, and they're just these like little bursts of wonderful drawings that are really colorful and really charming and really kind of fit with the different elements of different parts of the show. And for the third section, the empathy experiment, my third show, there are QR codes that link to music recordings from another dear friend, Eleonora Rosca, who's a fabulous cellist and pianist, and she composed music for the show. So when I perform the show, I play it from a speaker on stage. But I wanted that to kind of be incorporated into the reading of it somehow. So I have the links to the recordings in the book.
It's a brilliant idea.
I love that. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I had every intention of reading both books before interviewing you, but then I moved house, and they only got unpacked about a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh, but I will happily have to get on that. And me and Hannah sort of exchange guest books between ourselves, which is really nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds lush. It sounds very in your wheelhouse of performing, which is great. Yeah, lovely. So leading on from that, what was your journey to getting published? How did you get there?
Yeah, I when I first started with poetry, I didn't see myself publishing my work because I wrote so much of what I did to perform it. And so I will admit to not being hugely well read with kind of poetry in general. I'm definitely getting better, but would see things that were really clearly formatted or followed rules and line breaks and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, mine's just a whole kind of hodgepodge of structure and rhyming and stuff. And it was when I did the empathy experiment, I created a little kind of booklet of the poems. In fact, I did that for all of my shows. I made like little zines of the poetry to sell at the end of the shows. And Paul Needs, who's the publisher with Flapjack, came to see the empathy experiment, and he bought one of these booklets. And I'd already kind of like, I'd met for coffee with him, and I had said, like, I know you publish a lot of Manchester poets, and are you taking any submissions? We had a bit of a chat, and he said, you know, I've got an 18-month turnaround at the moment, so maybe let's talk in a year, sort of thing. And then he came to see the show, and he saw the booklet, and he saw that I had done quite a lot of work to format the poems to kind of look a certain way to match the flow of the performance. And so we met after that, and he said, I'll happily publish your work. So it was a really kind of non-traditional route into publishing. Because he's in Manchester, I know lots of the poets that he's published. So we'd been at social events together and you know, weren't close friends or anything, but we were sort of colleagues and acquaintances. And so I think having that connection helped to make that possible. And so I don't know what it's like to like cold submit a manuscript to a publisher, and I know that's the way in for so many people. And yet there are incredible publishers in our midst who are doing amazing work to really try to reach out to writers to publish new work or developing work. So I was quite fortunate to have a connection with Flapjack that way.
Yeah, I love that. It's really, really exciting, and it's nice hearing these unusual ways of getting in and knowing that there is, however unusually, different ways to access getting published.
Yeah, absolutely. But I get asked from a lot of people, so I've had to try to do a little research to recommend, because I can't say to everyone like, just go for coffee with Paul, you know.
Yeah, poor Paul.
He probably would not like that.
So hydrated and so caffeinated by all these like young, excited poets.
I think there's something to be said though about, you know, making the most of every opportunity, isn't there? And kind of networking, especially, and getting to know the people out there who can give you these opportunities. It's crucial, because you never know who you're going to meet in a night, do you? If you attend one of these poetry nights, it just takes one person to recognise your potential. So I think there's definitely something to be said about that.
Definitely. I think that's really interesting what you mentioned about networking as well, because like historically, like 10-15 years ago, the word networking made me like dry heave. Like I deal with a lot of anxiety, and I was just always like, I don't like it. I never know what to say. Don't know what to do with my hands. Feel really awkward. But then aside from that, I was going out to all of these poetry nights in and around Yorkshire and beyond, and meeting people and just having a laugh and talking to them about their poetry. And making some connections and, finding out about other nights. And then as I built a profile, getting invites to other nights. And it dawned on me several years later to go, oh, that's also networking.
Yeah.
And it's not gross. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. I think there are kind of some quite negative connotations associated with networking. It feels very corporate. It feels very kind of like people in suits, kind of, that kind of vibe. But actually, just attending a poetry night is networking. You're expanding your network, aren't you? It's creating a community of people that you can call on as and when you need each other.
Yeah.
And there are some
Maybe we
really
should
lovely people.
it's like community building instead of networking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Or we reclaim networking and see it as like yarn bombing instead of like some sort of sneaky spider's web energy instead.
So you were kind of discussing there the kind of two books and the fact that the first one was quite different to the second one, in terms of maybe the second one kind of followed more conventional kind of poetry or poetic techniques. So what was your experience with that? How did the first book differ from the second book?
Yeah, hugely, because the material was all written for the first book. So it was just a case of the editing was very much just about tinkering with the words because it was so brilliant already. But
Of course.
but yeah, without sort of self-effacing, the work had been tried and tested in front of audiences, so there was a refined kind of element to it. Whereas with the second book, when I spoke to Paul about doing a second collection, and he said he'd be happy to do it, I would say maybe half of the work had been written, and so it was a real process of going, okay, what is the structure of this book? The title felt very clear and easy to find for the first collection, and it took me a longer time to figure it out for the second one. And then thinking, I'm trying to remember whether I figured out the structure and more writing came, or if it was more writing that I could fit into a structure, but it was definitely a more kind of organic process, and a little bit of terror of going, am I going to have anything to write? Have I said everything I wanted to say in the first book already? And certainly lots of the poems in this book have only ever been read aloud a few times. So yeah, it was really different. And it's really interesting too, because I published this one just last autumn. And when I did the first one, it was like my sole focus. It was a sanity keeper during pandemic. Whereas with my second one, I was working full time. I was doing a lot of freelance work, navigating some exhaustion and some burnout. And so I was really happy when the book came out, but didn't have the kind of emotional energy that I'd had the first time around. Yeah. And I likened it a little bit to like second child syndrome. So, the first, child, from what I've heard, I've not had children, but from what I've heard, there's a lot of the exuberance around it. And the second one comes along, it doesn't get quite the same attention.
Yeah.
This isn't saying across the board. This is, speaking quite generally.
Yeah.
But I did, like a couple of times, apologize to the book, going, I wish I had more time and energy to be present with it the same way that I had for the first one. But I think because the content was so different and so new as well, it was always going to be a completely different experience. So
yeah, I love that. It's really, really interesting that like the huge void that COVID gave you was so fundamentally motivating for getting the first book, and then the second book, just life was. I'm really reticent to say we've gone back to normal since COVID. I think I think normal has shifted massively. But you had more of sort of traditional style life with the work and trying to fit around like everyday life, getting on with things. Yeah. Do you feel, I hope this isn't a sort of cheeky question to ask, how do you feel the reception of the book's gone? Because the first one came in COVID off the back of all these shows, and the second one came off the back of the first one doing so well.
Yeah, it's so, gosh, it's really hard to try to gauge, because I felt like I had a lot to put into the anticipation of the first book. And it was an online book launch, and there were like I can't remember how many people came along, but it was international. Like I had friends, obviously family from Canada was watching, and friends from different parts of the world were watching. And even though it was weird and it was in my living room, and it just felt very kind of isolating, that there was something really like special about it.
Yeah.
And then by contrast, having the live book launch in last autumn, it was exciting, but it didn't have the kind of crackle for me that it had the first time around, because we were used to going back to live events and book launches and that sort of thing again. And I guess what was really nice is being able to attend lots of events as a guest to share the book and promote the book after it had come out. So I went on a really lovely little mini tour, mostly around the north, and got to go to lots of lovely nights and had really, really nice responses in those kind of like immediate ways. I think more broadly speaking online, it's not really had a huge kind of impact, but certainly when I'm sharing it in the kind of intimate spaces of poetry evenings, I feel like there's a lot of connection with it.
No, that's wicked. That must be really interesting for you. And you've also still been touring your shows since as well. You were at Wakefield at the start of the year, is that right?
Yeah, I got to perform at Wakefield Theatre Royal, which was really, really lovely. I was touring, or still am touring, How to Starve an Artist, which was my second show, and it's all about creative nourishment. And in every show, I have a featured guest for 10 minutes, and the wonderful Simone Yasmin agreed to come and be my guest. And I'd not met her in person before, and she just blew me away. She was so, so incredible. And it was one of those lovely experiences where it was a really tiny audience. It had been a bit tricky to get the buzz going around it, to get ticket sales going. And I'd heard from the venue, as well as lots of other venues, that the whole approach to selling tickets is just very different in a kind of post-pandemic era. And yet I still really wanted to go. The venue contacted me a week or two beforehand and said, like, the ticket sales are low. Do you want to cancel? And I kind of thought, no, I feel like I really need to go and do this. And so, like I said, it was a small audience, but at the end of it, someone came up to me and said, I do a lot of development work with managers and CEOs, and I think you would do a great job in like coming in to run a workshop with them. Could I follow up with you? The executive director of the theater came and spoke to me, and she said, I hope you bring more work. And another woman came up to me and said, can I please have a hug? And she said she'd been widowed within the past year, and she wasn't sure if she was going to go along tonight, and she decided to come, and was really glad that she did. And yeah, it was just those moments where you think the people that were here were the people that needed to be here, including myself. So yeah, it was really, really meaningful. So I'm taking that show to the Buxton Fringe in July, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, lush.
I really appreciate your honesty there as well, because I think quite often there's this pressure to kind of like, no, it was a sellout. It was, I sold this many tickets. And coming to this as a musician previously, there was always that anxiety of, have we sold any tickets? What are we going to do? But I love the way you phrase it, like the people who needed to be there were there. And in actual fact, kind of having those small kind of personal connections can actually mean a lot more than performing to just a blanket of people who you don't really get to connect with. So I think that was I think a lot of people appreciate hearing that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's such a funny one. It's something I have to continually remind myself of, is just to be present and be grateful with what's going on there. By complete contrast, I did the show at the Morecambe Poetry Festival last September, and it was a very fluid kind of event. And I'd spoken to Matt Panish, the director of the festival, to kind of gauge numbers. And he said, there might be about 100 people. And I was like, oh, okay. Wow. And I hand out a lot of stuff in the show. And so I made sure to have like enough for 100 people. And there were 100 people there. And it was then that complete contrast of like, okay, how to still maintain this sense of connection and intimacy in a really packed room that's also a bar and people are moving around and stuff. So it was like a performance boot camp for sure. But it's still really fun.
I don't know if you've been able to answer this, but how do you do that then? How do you, with such a big crowd, connect still?
How do I do it? Well, I think this one, it's interesting because it's participatory. So everyone gets a starving artist kit when they come in. So I think like going around before I started the show and handing that out means I'm like saying hello and making eye contact with everybody and having that nice personal connection. And then during one of the poems, it's about water, and so I take around a jug of water, and in each kit is a little paper cup, and I pour a cup of water for every person. And I did that with the whole room. It was super intense and took a lot of like projecting my voice because I was off mic at that point. And I think that made sort of that connection for people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everybody was completely invested, and I'm sure people, their minds wandered, or they were like, this is dumb or whatever. But on the whole, the kind of energy of the space felt really connected.
Yeah, good.
That sounds fantastic. I think it leads on to a really interesting question, if we do say ourselves, which is how do you find performing your book poems versus your spoken word poems, which I guess is kind of like first book versus second book, if that sort of helps.
Love that question. Because I think, there is that constant question that comes up around page poetry versus performance poetry, which itself is such a like, what does that even mean? So I love the way that you phrased it as like book poem versus a performance poem, because with the first collection, everything was written, everything had been performed dozens of times before I published it. And with the second collection, How to Find Where You Belong, like so much of it is still really new. And I think that it's interesting when I'm putting together a set list, I find myself defaulting to the ones that I know really well. And that I think sometimes I kind of want to dig into the ones that I haven't performed a lot or don't know particularly well, because I still like them, and I don't want them to feel neglected, but like I want to kind of weave them into my repertoire a little bit more. I would love to have the time and discipline to do things that like people like Dominic Barry and Jerry Potter do, which is to like memorize their poetry all the time. Because I definitely prefer not to have a book in my hand. I definitely prefer to have it memorized, and then I can really embody it. And I don't like to perform with my glasses on. I like to like have them on my head so I can see blurry blobs of people, but not see them in sharp focus.
Yeah.
And so when I'm reading, I'm like, oh, there's everybody. Details. So yeah, I think overall, I think just with my performance background, I just so vastly prefer to perform without a book in my hand, but I'm not quite there yet with the second collection.
Yeah, totally fair enough. I mean, there's one poem of mine I know well enough, and even then I'm like, I'll just have the phone for safekeeping.
Yeah.
Imagine not having it and forgetting. That would be horrible.
I will say though too, there are so many poets who read and who, I mean, much like yourself, who are so animated while they read as well. So I think no one should ever feel like because they have a poem in their hand that they don't like officially qualify as a performance poet. That's nonsense. I think that there's still very much a way to completely embody a poem and bring it to life if it's in your hand.
Yeah. I also think it's really ableist if you're not careful, because I'm dyslexic. I'm probably ADHD.
Well, this is it.
And like, the poem that I remember is the poem that I first did at the Huddersfield Lit Fest Slam in 2022. So it's taken me 2 years to at least get the rhythm of that down that I can remember.
Yeah.
So it's not I don't think it should be a barometer for performance poetry.
No.
Agreed.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we'll kind of move on a little bit now to, you did mention a little bit of the fact that you took your book on a tour. Just briefly, could you just talk about that a little bit more? What was it like taking that book on tour? What was kind of the response? And as well, I think sometimes we've kind of talked about this idea of community. When you've built a community, it can be quite scary going out of that area. So, yeah, have you got any advice, or have you got any feedback about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was really lucky when I started out with things where I was single and I was living in Huddersfield and I was working full time, and I had this crazy thing called a disposable income. And
those days.
I remember that. And I would just go to every poetry night I could find, and that was that networking / community building that I didn't really realize I was doing at the time, but came to recognize. And I think that's built into the connections that I could then reach out to say, I have a book. I'd love to come along to your night. Have you got any slots available? And that kind of thing. So I did that online for the first book, and was really fortunate that there were still a lot of a lot of poetry groups who were making it work online. And then for the second book, it was a lot of reaching out again and, saying any chance that I can book a slot. And sometimes people would approach me as well, which was always really nice, and suggest some dates. I think for me, both as someone who has toured my work, but also as an event programmer and host with Attic Stories, I really appreciate the kind of care that people take in reaching out about these things, to try to do it well in advance. Because at the moment, Attic Stories has its guests booked until the end of 2024. So these things get booked up well in advance. And also to not kind of assume, even though it might be someone I know or I've gone to the night loads of times, to say are you open to this? If not, that's completely okay, but I'd love to come along. And yeah, I think approaching it with a grace and a care to make those contacts is super duper important. And I think also because it's such a word of mouth connected kind of a community, I think it's okay to say, if you know of other nights to recommend, please can you mention my name or pass along the contact details to kind of reach out that way. I know across the years there's been people who so valiantly try to pull together some kind of directory or list of poetry nights, and it's one of those things where as soon as it's put together, it's completely changed. Yeah. Although I will say Write Out Loud do a really, really good job of that online. Nice. So yeah, Write Out Loud is a good one to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think it just comes from going to nights, seeing what the vibes are, thinking, okay, does my work here? And then making those approaches, and yeah, just being gracious through it as well. And recognizing that it's not always going to logistically work too. There's some nights that I would absolutely love to approach, but I don't currently have a car, and it's just not feasible to kind of get there and come back on the same night. And certainly something that was on my mind and I kind of achieved was keeping a balance through it as well, because like I say, I work full time, and making sure there's self-care woven into there.
Yeah.
Still working on that one.
Yeah.
It can be so hard though, can't it? Especially when it's something that, when writing is also such a huge part of your life and yourself, you don't want to let that side go. But unfortunately, we talk about this a lot on the podcast.
Yeah.
Your days are just kind of consumed by work, and then you need to give yourself that space, because you can't be creative if you're completely burnt out. It just doesn't work. Or similarly, you can't be getting on a stage and performing when you just fatigued. So it's a hard balance to kind of strike, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is for sure. And it's a funny one because the show How to Starve an Artist is all about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I really need to hear this show so I can remind myself,
Yeah.
I love performing it and I love sharing it, but I also need to try to live it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
No.
I think something else I want to touch on is Attic Stories as your community, because as you said, it's been going many years, but 10 years under your sort of leadership. How have you sort of not curated your community? Have you grown your community? How have you invested? I'm sure you've seen people literally develop their own performance. How has that been for you?
It's been amazing. Honestly, it's just such a gift. I really pinch myself sometimes going there thinking I get to do this. This is so cool. And it has definitely been a journey for me with that. So when I took it over and was programming it and hosting it, I was still quite new as a poet, and so would sort of be so laser focused on making sure the mechanics of it were okay, that the guests had the information that they needed, that the space was laid out fine, the promo was there with the theater, and then would have lovely feedback from people about the kind of warmth of the night and the friendliness of the hosting and all of this kind of stuff. And it wouldn't land for me because I would just be so oh no, it's fine. It's a combination of different things. And it took probably 3 or 4 years for me to take a moment and go, oh no, I am part of that. I am contributing to that. That's not happening by accident. And I think a lot of that is because I was quite fortunate to go to some really amazing nights and draw down from what I saw in them. So my absolute beacon is evidently, and yes, I am married to one of the people that used to run it. But Kieran King and Ella Gainsborough and Liv Barnes all kind of worked on it together. And it was just such a strong example about of bringing people together and it being about the poetry. It wasn't about the hosts. It wasn't about being loud or crazy or like full of bravado. It was about being a vehicle for people to come and share.
Yeah.
And I think unconsciously at first, but now more consciously, I'm really recognizing like how important that is to hold the space for people to come and share, whether they've shared 100 times or it's their first time, whether they're later in life or young or for whatever, that's the beauty of performance poetry, is the democracy of it. You have something to say, you're going to come and share it. And I think all of those things have factored into it being this really welcoming, really supportive community. And it's, oh my gosh, it's been so lovely along the way seeing like poetry friendships form in the audience, I remember one evening I overheard some people talking about like making plans for going to dinner together. And it's like, oh yeah. And there was one particular moment where there's a woman called Kathy who came along. I first met her at the Huddersfield Literature Festival Slam, and she is just this force to be reckoned with. She's this amazing woman. She's like, she's just incredible. But her background is in science, and she came to poetry after she had retired and she had been widowed, and it just exploded out of her. And she came up to me at the end of One Attic Stories and she gave me this big hug. She's very much known for her hugs. And she said, "You were the start of the rest of my life." Oh. I just wept.
Oh my goodness.
Because it was just such a beautiful gem of a moment of why the night is so important.
It just suddenly makes sense, doesn't it? Because, it does take a lot of work, doesn't it, to hold this space. But yeah, just like you saying, I could just relate to that so much. We were just talking actually tonight about, so we have a lot of people who turn up to Inkspill alone and they sit at a table with other people, and by the end of the night, like you say, they're sharing stories, they're sharing parts of themselves, and then they come next month and they're going for drinks after, or they've gone for a pie beforehand, and it's just lush, to kind of see that evolution and to just see the work getting better every month as well, that confidence coming through. So that really definitely does resonate.
Must get to one of your nights.
Yes. We'll report you and Kieran across. And,
yes. I keep joking about how I'd love to invent teleportation, except I would call it telepoetation, and we could just poet anywhere we wanted to.
Oh, the dream.
I know, I'd love that. I mean, quite a lot of in the podcast, a few people have mentioned some nights that they really recommend us going to. But unfortunately, when I finish work, me getting into the centre of Manchester, it's just not practical, or me getting to like Leeds or... So it definitely would be good to just a little cheeky transportation.
Mat leave, we'll just strap the babe upon you and off the little adventure.
I'll see how that goes. Well, we've just got 2 more questions left, really. It's been brilliant talking to you. The last one, I'm not sure if this is going to be applicable, really. Have you performed in Canada? Have you performed your poetry out there?
So I didn't really come to poetry until I moved to the UK. So my background is in theatre. So I did lots of performing in theatre shows when I was growing up and in uni and after uni and stuff. And I have been back to Canada with The Geography of Me and How to Starve an Artist at the Winnipeg Fringe Festivals, which got really like lovely receptions. I mean, my family and friends were probably 78% of the audience, but it's okay.
Still the reception.
But I'm certainly in touch on social media with like different groups and stuff in Winnipeg and beyond that do poetry. And I think it would be such a different experience to live there now. And I just think the poetry community and scene has grown so much in Canada since I lived there. There were certainly communities happening while I was there, but I was quite theatre focused at the time. So yeah.
Do you feel there's a difference, like when you took your work back with you? I mean, not even just like Canada and the UK, but also like having that literal home crowd of your family and friends. Like, there must be something very sort of empowering to be able to like bring that work and be like, this is what I've created while I've been away.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially because both shows to different extents have lots of like memoir elements to them. I wouldn't call them memoir shows, but they're drawn from my experiences. And so to go back to a place where a lot of the people that are seeing it know me, like know the fabric of me from really kind of early days, and maybe know some of the things that I talk about, the challenges I've gone through. And I can imagine like seeing that then manifested as this poetry show must be quite interesting. You know, that's very much a reflection of the stuff that I've gone through, but it's been shaped into this creative response. So yeah, I'm so keen to go back to the Winnipeg Fringe. I grew up on the Winnipeg Fringe, and perform more poetry. I'm trying to convince Kieran that the two of us should do a show together,
We
because
should definitely do a show together.
it would be so much fun. And from having gone to the Fringe loads when I was a kid, or when I was in my teens and 20s, any show, anyone with like an English accent would just sell it, because they were,
That's good to know.
yeah.
We'll be heading over to the Winnipeg Fringe together. No, I absolutely love that. And that must be really nice that there's sort of a scene to go back to as well now, like, but also like a scene you've been separate to, like it's not something that you grew and left and have come back to. It's actually something that's grown in your absence, and you get to kind of just go back and enjoy it and invest in it in your own way.
Yeah, definitely. I did make some really interesting connections in 2021 on World Poetry Day. I did an online event and had 21 poets from, I think, across 7 countries and 5 time zones. We did it as a fundraiser and reached out to people in Winnipeg and said, I'd love to book some Winnipeg poets for this. Who can you recommend? And so had people on who I knew, but people who I hadn't met. And I was like, oh, if I wasn't so far away, I'd love to tap into this community a little bit more. Yeah.
Huddersfield's much more accessible than Winnipeg. It has to be
little bit.
Even with the terrible train service that we've endured the last year. Well, this has been absolutely lovely, and I hope we keep the good vibes going with our last question, which we always acknowledge is a tricky one that we haven't ever answered. Maybe that's what we'll do for the last episode.
I simply could never.
Well, not thinking.
How to nail
I'm going to
one.
ask it to you. The question is, what is your favourite book? Obviously, other than your own.
Well, of course. Yeah. I sometimes struggle with like, what is your favorite type of questions? Because, if someone says to me, what's your favorite film or your favorite music? I'm like, have I seen a film? What is music? Can you just draw a blank, right?
Yeah.
But with books, it's the opposite, where I'm just like, how can I possibly choose? And so I was thinking about the fact that there are some books I read as a child that had profound impact on me. So The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch, he was this acclaimed Canadian children's author. And The Paper Bag Princess is just a joyous book about a princess called Elizabeth, who's very independent, and she saves Prince Ronald from the dragon. And
of course she does. Yeah,
of course she does. Yeah. But I thought about it a little bit more, and for right now, at this moment, I would say my favorite book is The Republic of Love by Carol Shields.
Okay.
She was a Winnipeg writer. She was the chancellor of the University of Winnipeg when I graduated, so I got to shake her hand at my grad ceremony.
Very nice.
She died a few years ago from cancer, sadly, which it was very sad and a huge loss to the literary scene in Canada and beyond. And The Republic of Love is set in Winnipeg, and I read it for the first time a few years ago and was just transported to so many communities that I grew up in. And she's gorgeous writer. So I read
The Stone Diaries, and it's just for those who don't know, it's kind of tracking a woman's life, and the last chapter is written from her death. It's almost, she writes from the perspective as if she is dead, and it's her spirit, and it's just such a moving book. She was such a talented writer, and that's a really, really great choice.
I've never heard of her. This is why I love asking this question, because I'm just like, I genuinely hadn't heard of her, so I get to add that to my TBR. And
it's a brilliant book.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Rose. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and having such a good natter.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do. I know you both work so hard on building the community, and I love, love, love all of the stuff that I hear about your night. I adore the name of your podcast as well. Ink Spill is just so dang clever. And
Oh,
yeah, just wish you guys all the best in what you continue
thank you.
to do.
Oh my goodness. Wasn't she just... How lovely is Rose?
Just so lovely. We knew it as well because when we attended Attic Stories, we felt really comforted and really nurtured in that space.
Yeah.
So I just had a feeling,
She's got real nurturing energy.
she does, and I think that's A, why she's built the community and has been building it for as long as she has, and B, why she's just so successful, because people just want to be around her. She's a naturally very magnetic person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally
I've
agree.
taken that word from you. You use that word a lot and I like it.
Do I?
Magnetic.
I would have thought that. She was an obvious choice. I keep saying this about all our guests, though, to be honest. I think we've been very instinctive about the guests we've chosen this year.
Yeah.
But like Rose, hugely influential for me. Like, just like there's so many of her poems that stick in my mind, which is quite rare because I probably have ADHD. Like, things, I'm a little sieve, and you'll know from working with me, friends with me, things just slip through, and I'll randomly just go like today at work, this is like a little side note, but my boss has an embossed AirPods case.
Oh yeah.
And it has his initials on it, and he kept flipping it my way, and without context I just went, "What's your middle name?" And he was like, why? For me, I've been watching him like flip this like faff with this case. For him, I was just asking him a really invasive personal question in the middle of work.
Oh, no.
And so that's how it feels off with poetry. But Rose's stuff really sticks in, and like there's two poems that come to mind straight away that I'm like, she's just phenomenal. She's such a good performer.
Yeah, she definitely is. And I think as well, it was just really nice to speak to somebody who has done so much with her poetry as well. So kind of taking it to the stage, having that published work as well, and going on the tour with it. It was really interesting to kind of hear her take on, kind of making it into a piece of stagecraft, getting the audience involved. I thought I would have loved to have been in that audience. I want Rose's cup of water.
I thought I was going to say, I want Rose's water. And I was like, that sounds weird, Hannah. That sounds weird.
Give me her holy water.
I think it's really funny. She was at the Edinburgh Fringe when I was up there. I believe she was at the Edinburgh Fringe. Yeah, she was at the Edinburgh Fringe when I was up there.
She had a plaque behind her that said Fringe.
That was the Manchester Fringe.
Was it? Because I was reading it, I was trying to be like, what's that? What's that accolade?
We're not looking at Rose, we're looking at her background.
Yeah, so looking at all of her successes just plastered on the wall behind her, bless her.
Totally well deserved. I've just missed her shows by like the skin. I think like last year she was doing them when I was having my little cortisone surgeries and stuff, and like I've just always just managed to miss it by like a hair's breadth. So next time Rose performs, we'll share on socials because we think she's fantastic anyway.
She is.
But
She's
we'll
definitely
also
worth watching.
Oh yeah, we'll also make the effort to go ourselves because that'd be really nice.
Total masterclass in performing poetry.
Yes.
Captivating. So I'm not surprised that she's had the success she has, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Remained grounded and lovely. So yeah, sorry, thank you, Rose.
They were around.
She's remained grounded.
Remained
lovely.
grounded, yeah. I thought you were just having another ADHD moment saying, Hannah, the roses are lovely. And I was like, okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit, my love. Anyway,
I'm not that bad.
And I was like, there are no roses in here, so maybe there's actually a deeper problem going on.
I've seen roses. But yeah, I think something that you can't on, but I just want to draw on a little bit at this point, is her talking about the show where they'd sold a few tickets and she didn't think it was wasn't sure whether to go ahead with it, and she did go ahead with it, and talking about like the people that were there that night needed to be there that night, including herself. I think it, because you picked up on it, resonated for both of us. That's, we love Ink Spill. Ink Spill is our baby. Well, sorry, you are now second child.
Yeah.
Ink Spill has been like such a gift and a rod for our backs at times.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of times, because we work full time, that we are exhausted when we get to Ink Spill on a Friday night, and yet we come away feeling
just totally energized,
like weirdly giddy and hyper for like having done like a very long day of work.
We do always have that panic though, don't we?
Always.
When we turn up at 7 o'clock, the room's looking a bit empty, we just think, oh my goodness, is this it? But then in actual fact, people do arrive, and by the end we always have a packed room. But just like what Rose said to us, the people who need to be there are there, and you just form such amazing bonds in these places. And it kind of harks back to what we've talked about a lot in previous seasons of success is what you make of it. So
absolutely.
Like just the fact that someone turned up, that's success. The fact
Yeah.
that it resonated with someone, that's success. You don't need to play to a sold out whatever to be a successful person.
No,
It's,
definitely not.
It's just how you measure it.
And also, there's a lot of... We're very lucky that we have a really beautiful core community, but we also very, very regularly have first-timers or second-timers who only come a few times or even one time. But there's a lot of them that I can sort of see in my mind's eye, and I can remember them coming, and like I don't mourn them. I'm definitely like I worry. I'm like, it was so lovely to have that time with you, and I hope that they'll come back when they need to, or when they want to, when they can.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a really nice little pertinent moment of just being like, maybe there's something we need to hold on to a bit more when we're getting, it's 6:59 and there's 3 wonderful people in the room. We're not a numbers based thing, but always just like we get a bit panicked.
We do. Well, I think it's funny, isn't it? Because when we first started back in the Grove, and we just had this little sofa area, and we were ecstatic that we had 6 people turn up to fill a sofa, and that was success to us. And now it's grown to the point where we're getting to 40-50 people per evening, and again, you've just got to pinch yourself sometimes and think, like, that's incredible, isn't it? And so you've got to just check in every now and then and just be like, actually, we are hugely successful in what
we're doing
do.
Fine. We need to worry less,
we
but
are.
we won't. But we should.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll probably sign up to another huge project because we're like, we need more. But there's nothing wrong with expanding things.
Yeah, it's all good. Creative task this week. I think this is a week. In week 1 we suggested people research open mics and look for submission windows, and I think this is the time that you and we pick one and we say, right, we're going to you perform, I'm going to submit, and it doesn't have to be done by next week because like that would be very stressful. But it's just that I think it's time to like pick one and be like, I'm going to submit to this.
Yeah, take it seriously, put it in the diary kind of thing,
and actually write for it. Because that's my issue. I put in the diary and then I'm just like, I'm tired. And I actually want to commit and be like, I'm going to do one, but I'm going to do one properly. And I hope for you that I can suggest a few nights maybe around your end.
Yeah, it's something I would really, really like to do. Because just like Rose told us, and I think we've talked about this in previous episodes too, building that community and building that network, knowing who's around you, can be really, really helpful. It's crucial at times. Yeah,
I mean, like thinking of the festival lineup last year, that was basically me trekking around the north and meeting loads of fantastic poets and being like, these are who we should put on the stage.
Yeah, and you just, I mean, even from this podcast, you've been able to recommend such a range of people and range of guests that have just had such incredible knowledge, and that's only through you meeting them in these places, isn't it?
Yeah, that's totally that is like, I won't say my network, 'cause it's our network, because when I talk to people I'm always like, I'm Abby and I perform, but I also run Inkspill and I talk about that, and it's like, it's two sides of the same coin for me of just like, this is the work I do. And yeah, I've been very lucky that sort of because I work hybrid, I have much more capacity to go and trek off, health willing. I say trek off, it's going to Leeds and Manchester. I'm not like going to like Edinburgh or like,
it's still quite a trek though. You go like
when the trains run, delightful.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm like at home, I just get in from work and you're like in central Manchester doing this big cathedral something, and I'm like,
that was a fab one. That was very
insane.
much fun.
But so knowing your what's out there and actually going and committing to doing something.
Yeah, I think that's the task this week, is picking something and making genuine effort to make it happen, and being kind to yourself if it doesn't, because realistically life does happen. Yeah, we very much know that after this last year.
We do.
But actually, like being dedicated and picking something, I mean, like I'm going to go for this. Yeah,
I think that's a good one for this week, and I think it's manageable as well. Yeah, I think from a print perspective, it was just quite interesting to talk about how Rose printed her first and kind of collated her first collection based on what she knew went down well. So again, I think this idea of getting out there and sharing your work, and whether that's sharing it with friends and family or going to an open mic and sharing it in that setting, the more you rehearse it, the more you're going to get feedback, and then which ones to put into a collection, don't you?
Yeah.
So I think, as much as daunting as it is, we've got to do it. You've got to
break the seal at some point, and like build into this point.
Yeah.
Building this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're such professionals.
We truly are.
2.5 seasons in, we are polished.
Still scrambling for words because we're just like, what's
so tired and so hot.
It is so warm. Yeah, we definitely need. We need acknowledgement for that. But
Yes.
we're I'd say that's we're done for today.
That's episode 3.
Yeah, episode 3
Perfect.
fini. Again, thank you, Rose. It was lovely to speak to you, and we hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll be back next week for episode 4 with a lovely Dr. Rio Matchett, who is a doctor of dramaturgy, which is flipping cool for starters. All around hot girl, and furnace producer at Leeds Playhouse. And I think I might have mentioned last week, but if not, the Leeds Summer programme has just been released at time of recording, and it's stunning, and there's some stuff on there from the Edinburgh Fringe that I saw that I know are like really good, so I'll be sharing those on socials.
Brilliant.
But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been lovely having you. And
See you next week.
see you next week.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.